NSI, Leviton 7500 series consoles. They'll either show up as a 7516, 7524, or a 7532. Each one, depending on its number, is able to be doubled up, meaning a 16 could be 32 channels of individual control, a 24 could be up to 48 channels of individual control, and a 32 can be up to 64 channels of individual control. Now you can reprogram channels or faders to activate dimmer numbers well above 32, but that's when we get into the holding the change and increasing our max dimmers. So you do have that as an option if you need to reach out to dimmers at higher numbers than what you have on the board. Fortunately, the 7500 has got enough memory and enough options into it that they built in a factory default, which occasionally is needed depending on the circumstances. Has it been 5 years since it's been defaulted and you're starting to see corruption here and there and things just aren't recording right? Default and start over. Has it been because bad power in the town or the building or surge or spike or lightning? Also, if you're thinking that it's a hardware issue, it's usually best to do a factory default and start over than it is just to call in and send the thing in and get it repaired, because if it's a software issue and you clear it up by doing a reset, you're saving yourself a lot of trouble. Simply turn the console off, turn the console on. You'll see the version release number. It'll say REL. And this one it said REL 1.34. That's the version release number. You can see that every time you turn the console on. If the console hasn't been reset in years, there's been bad weather, there's been too much reprogramming and programming over it, simply turn the console off. You'll hold the 4 buttons down to the left-hand side of the encoder wheel. 2 of them will be help and change, but the function 1 and function 2 button will not be labeled. You'll hold these 4 buttons down while turning the console on. After just 2 or 3 seconds, you can see it says initializing factory defaults, please wait. This does cure a lot of the calls that come into tech support. First thing you'll have to do is set up the default patch. When it is empty and defaulted, you'll see it'll say no patch on the screen. One way you can prove that everything is working is to rotate the knob around, see it goes to 2 hours, bring it back down to 0. You'll see that the time took over, but the N and the H from no patch is still showing. To do a patch, which would be one of the first things you'd want to do after defaulting the console, it's simple. You go to the setup button, which would be F4 one time, and then you'll see on F3 it says patch setup one time. Once again at F3, default patch. Are you sure? Yes or no? F3 once again for yes. Now, you bring it back to the main menu each time. It'll be underneath the function 3 button. It'll be printed main menu. That'll always show us the main screen that we're activating. Now you can see now as we raise up a fader that the light turns on above it. Only because we have the correct subs area in play. The LED will light up if it's active. Now what we're doing is we're moving into control for the top half and the bottom half. The top half is A and it's printed as A. The bottom half is B, and you don't see it right next to it, but the arrow does bring you over to the LED that's lit up that's called B. Now if one section or the other section isn't working, it's only because the fader for that mode hasn't been brought to active. You'll know that both are active when both LEDs are on. So that's top half and bottom half. And that's one way to prove that your patch took place. And that you have your lower row of faders active. Just look over to see that your LEDs are on. If they're not, just change the fader to the opposite and then you've got control again. You do need to make sure that your Grandmaster is up, not to test the panel to see that the LEDs are, but to get the lights overhead and for your dimmers to work, the Grandmaster needs to be above 0. The LED will blink green if you're not at max of 100%. So we can even be at 90%, it blinks. As long as you bring it up to 100. Now if the LED is red, you'll know that your blackout is on. Even though you will get activation from the console, you won't get lights overhead. Your dimmers will not be responding if you're in blackout mode. A lot of the other faders down here, except for the Grandmaster and the A and the B, will not be needed for basic usage. If you get serious into having audio involved, then you'll have to learn to use the level fader. The bump mode is incorporated by some, and if you do choose to use a bump button for certain programming or usage, well, then you might need to bring the bump up, but a lot of times, we don't need to. Same thing with the stack, step, fade, go option. It's very involved programming with a bunch of pre-programmed scenes, so you won't need this fader, the level, or the rate for a whole lot of issues. So those would be the four most important: the A, B subs, the Grandmaster, and the bump. Now with the default patch operating normal, you can have dual control of 1 through 16, or you can have individual control by dropping down to, and I'll go through this again, where you can have it on 17 through 32. Now this is a 7516, so if it was the 7524 unit, you could then change from 1 through 24 twice over to 1 through 48, and you would be dropping down to 25 through 48 in that model. Same thing with the 32. But notice, if we do want our individual control, now we have to move our subs B to turn on the light, so that way now channel 31 is actually channel 31, it's not channel 15, and we do have control. Unfortunately, in this example, we don't have an LED to show you like we do with the top row. But that is if you need to double up the amount of channels, and I'll show that step again. From the main screen, main menu button, we hit setup one time. And much like before when we hit the patch on F3, instead now we're going to hit F1 for mode. Right now it's in single mode, 1 through 32, single fader individual control. But by hitting the mode button again, we can go into subs, which is pre-recorded scenes on the bottom row. In that situation, for immediate control, you only get 1 through 16. You're using your 17 through 32 as pre-recorded scenes, presets, submasters, whatever you want to call it. But while staying in this option screen, you can change modes back to B. Notice you have to bring the fader up or down to keep that light on if you want to be active. A lot of people do ask, why would I want it to be in two scenes of 1 through 16? The answer is, why these two faders are opposite of each other, so that you can fade from one to another. So if what you want people to see presently are lights 1, 3, and 5, but coming up on the next scene, you want them to see 2, 4, and 6. Well, right now, 2, 4, and 6 on the bottom row are turned off because our B subs is at 0. But with one hand, which is why B is opposite, we can bring A and fade it out as we fade in B. So now you can see 2, 4, and 6 are lit up, and 1, 3, and 5 are not. So you can change the scene and prep what you want people to see next without them seeing it and get it ready. When you change again back up to the top row, you'll see B fades out, A fades on, and so did the indicators for the faders that are now active. 2, 4, and 6 cannot be seen right now. So you can make the changes you want. And that explains the reason why B in the subs is opposite. Same thing, we want to show this as our next scene. Here we go, we're ready to go. Boom, we slide it in, they take over, adjust what you want to do on the top. Which is why people do want, at times, 2 rows of 16 or 2 rows of 24, depending on the size of the console they have. When it comes to recording subs, if you're simply going to use the top row of faders, it's much easier with an example of 1, 3, and 5. Hit record, hit the lower row bump button, you'll notice that the record light turns off. Now it seems like you should be able to lift up this fader and see that it recorded 1, 3, and 5 accurately, but you would have to change to sub modes. And from the main menu, set up one time, and as you hit the mode button, you'll notice it starts going through our options of subs, B mode, and the extended mode. So now we'll leave it in the subs mode. Notice that our fader for subs B is now off, so we need to bring it up to keep it active. Now if we raise fader 1, you'll see that accurately recorded 1, 3, and 5, channels 1, 3, and 5 into submaster number 1. Now if you do want to record your extended channels into a sub, instead of having it in the B mode, we would have to adjust to our extended channel mode. So set up one time, mode, we'll advance it to 17 through 32. Notice we have to change our subs B. We'll bring up fader 1, you can see that the LED turns on. We'll bring up fader 32. Now notice our fader does not turn on. That is normal, because there is not an LED to show us channel 32. There's an LED to show us channel 16. So if this would turn on right now, we would know we're in the wrong mode. So fortunately, we have it set up correct. LED number 1 is showing, LED channel 32 is not. We have our B set up correct. We'll go about the recording these subs with the same steps. The record button. In this situation, I'm going to hit record sub number 5. We'll see that the LED turns out. We can lower our faders. Now we will change our mode to subs mode. So from the main menu, set up once, mode button once, you'll see the LED brings us into subs mode. So when I raise number 5, we can see without having a monitor that it accurately recorded something, but we cannot prove that 32 is here. So either a monitor or your lights will show you that you just recorded it correct. In this situation, if you would see an LED turn on here, you would know that you recorded it incorrectly and you recorded 16 instead of 32. There's no way of proving you have 32 accurately programmed in here without having some external source to prove. Using the edit option is fine when you need to change a pre-recorded scene in the submasters. But what we prefer is that you just set up that entire scene again, adding in the one that you want or taking out the one that you want and re-recording it in there, because by editing the scenes it can lead to eventual corruption of reprogramming over areas that have been reprogrammed and then needing a factory default in another 3 or 4 or 6 months. It's better to just re-record the entire submaster scene than it is to try and edit it. The bump buttons down below have got an intensity that you can choose to set differently. And you could bring it down to 50% if it's bump button control. If it's fader control, the fader will override the bump button option. The fader will go to the Grandmaster. Much like the fader has a Grandmaster, the bump button also has an intensity level called bump right next to the Grandmaster. So if you are going to use bumps for control, the bump button fader would need to be up. Now this is why we're in subs mode, but if we could, from the main menu, set up one time, we'll go back to B mode, we'll make sure our fader is correct. If we go with bump mode, well, you can see the intensity of the LEDs. So sure enough, when we're in B mode or the lower mode for individual control, this bump fader next to the Grandmaster will be like the Grandmaster for faders, but it'll be the bump master for bump buttons. That way, if they do decide to use bump buttons, but they want the intensity a little bit lower, they can change it with the bump button and just leave it lower. Most of the time, that's left at full. Another call we get a lot on is max channels, or channels that are allotted. From a default, this would go back to 16 channels. The way we can see this is F4 setup button one time, and then more F4 once again. Now right here it tells us max dims that it's connected to right now is 16. So it wouldn't matter if we brought B's bottom row active and changed it over to 17 through 32. With a max dims of 16 presently from default, we would only have 16 channels of control. And tech support does get a lot of calls on this. To double this easily, you just hit the size 16 one time, and if it's a 7516, it'll just say size 20, or if it's a 7524, right here on the screen, it'll say 24, max dims 24 from default. But if you hit the F3 button one time for size, it'll ask you, changing memory size will require a memory clearing. Do you wish to proceed? Yes or no. F3 again for yes. Now notice it didn't ask you what number you wanted to change it to, because all this will do is automatically double it. It takes a moment to clear the memory, set it up for 32 channels instead of 16. Now let's say that's not enough. You actually need more channels. The way you would change that is to hold the button called change to the left of the encoder wheel, and at the same time rotate the wheel to the number of channels you need. So let's say it's 48 channels. So you've got 48 channels of control. You let go of the change, it'll stay there. People ask, why is this important? Because there are ways to get this console to activate channels above 32. So you could activate 33, 34, whatever you're going up to. And I think if you're running DMX, that it'll actually go up to 512. I just want to see it. Sure enough, 512. Yep, because that's the max that DMX can handle. So you can bring your maximum amount of dimmers that you're going to call out to from different channel numbers up to 512. So if all of a sudden, you don't need channel 4 to be dimmer 4, you could then go in and patch and change channel 4 to be activating dimmer 33 or dimmer 48. So it is possible with this console to reach dimmer channels above double whatever the number of the console. And this is a big one we get calls on. Normally they're not going above double. Normally they just want their 16 console to handle 32 channels or less. It's the quick and basic and easy. We go back to the main screen. Once again, it's setup, then more, and then size. And it'll automatically double from the default of 16 to 32 without making any changes. But if they need to make changes, hold the change, rotate the wheel, stop at the max amount of dims that they need. Another one that we get a call over is changing the protocol out of the console. Sometimes they want microplex, sometimes they want DMX. Simple setup. Once again, from F4 setup, more, and then it shows MCX out. Now what that means is both microplex and DMX out. And you can leave this console in two different directions with two different communication cords. You could have one cord run microplex out to a bunch of microplex dimmers. You could have a DMX cord go out to a bunch of DMX dimmers or DMX fixtures. Now by pressing this button under the MCX, you'll notice once it changes to DMX, and that would mean DMX only, no microplex. You can hit it again, it says AMX, which might work, but it would have worked better a whole lot years ago, but you still have it as an option if you come across an AMX dimmer pack, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be AMX only, and you're going to need a special connection going from 5-pin to 4-pin. But back to this MCX, which I'm pretty sure is where it will go from default, which is good, because if you're only using one or the other, what does it matter? And if you're going to use both, it's already set up that way. Main menu button will always bring you back to the main screen. But if you do want to see what protocol you're running, it's F4 twice. Left-hand side will tell you MCX, which means microplex and DMX. Besides your power connector over here on the left with the on-off switch, the fuse is in the middle and your power cord. Fuse is inside here. You'll have to pry that open with a small little screwdriver to see if those fuses are still good or not. That is one thing to check. To the right of that, we've got our MIDI. MIDI through, MIDI out, MIDI in. Audio in is if you had a sound system in the place and you had the correct size jack, you could put it in here and you could activate some controls from audio command to where your pre-recorded scenes change from one to the next in beat with the song. Microplex, which is proprietary NSI protocol. In case you have some dimmer packs from that, you can go out with either the male or the female, it doesn't matter. Your DMX 512 out will be installed farthest to the right. Most panels, 99% or more of the panels, have got a piece of sheet metal covering up the circle on the far right hand side. That was for an add-on analog board and is obsolete now. You cannot add it to the console any longer. Fortunately, this console has a help button. If you get into deep programming and start figuring out something you don't know what the button stands for, one time press the help button. You'll see it changes on the screen. Press any key for help. Press help again to exit help. So if we just press again, we're back to the main screen. But if we press help just one time, and you want to know what this directional button means, press it one time, you'll see it changes on the screen. Selects the direction of the chase currently running in the chaser. You can hit help again, it'll go back to the main screen. Hit help, hit change, same thing, it'll tell you. And it'll be the same on every single button that you might hit, but from the main screen, if you hit help once, and then hit a button, it'll tell you on the screen what that button does. Hopefully that'll help you out. If for some reason you do have to get into it, when you turn it upside down, have the rear of it facing you. The three that will be easy to remove will be these three, but directly in line with them in the back. These screws will be the lowest down when it's upside down. This one here will be right here. And this third one here will go at number 6. So 1, 2, 3 across the back, 1, 2, 3 in the front, and the top half will come off from the bottom half.